Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to the motion before us, the one standing in name of the Honourable Member, Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh, Minister of Finance, and which seeks the approval of this Honourable House for the spending of $205+ billion, being estimates of expenditure for financial year 2014. In so doing, Mr. Speaker, I am mindful and conscious of your reported remarks directed to members of this House, urging that in making our presentation, we be competitive and not destructive. If you were quoted accurately, your exhortation was that we put aside petty, personal, and partisan differences and put Guyana first. The latter, that is to avoid being personal, is easy to comply with. The former, however, is not quite so simple, as this is serious business we are engaged in. And to this, I'll say that I owe it to myself, but moreover, to the many thousands of our countrymen and women who have sent me and my colleagues here to robustly represent their interests. Yes. My fallen comrade would have wanted this too, and I think of her as I make my contribution. Matter of fact, the minister himself expected this, and in his speech predicted that his budget will come under the microscope, or in his words, will be dissected from every imaginable perspective. However inadequate it may be, I too have a perspective, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true that a budget is about money, or moreover, numbers. It is even more true, though, that the figures before us did not fall from the sky, nor were they randomly plucked from a sack, but rather are informed by a philosophy and tell of the priorities of the government. It is because of my firm belief of the significance of the foregoing that I choose to spend time addressing and assessing this question before turning to some of the figures. With regard to the philosophy that underpins this budget and the Minister's observation that Budget 2014 is the largest budget ever, and having assessed the proposed allocations, I am reminded of my colleague, Honourable Member, Mr. Williams's plaintive cry in 2013, in his 2013 budget presentation, when he pointedly asked, bigger for whom, the masses or a small cabal? The minister boasts of economic growth, but when we go into communities across our country, as we have been doing the past 26 months, we have to ask, where's the development and where are the jobs?
Where's the money?
Mr. Speaker, the income and wealth disparity continues to widen within the society, and dangerously so. The poor, both employed and unemployed, are being left behind, and their ranks are swelling. This budget does not present a vision to correct the structural imbalance of the economy and to show the way to the good life which our people deserve. Mr. Speaker, the economy is highly dependent, some may say unhealthily so, on just two industries, these being gold and rice, with gold accounting for 47% of total 2013 exports and rice 17.5%. Together, they account for 2/3 of all exports. This reliance is not expected to change in 2014, and the minister's projections show gold exports to remain at 47% and rice marginally less at 16%, again representing almost 2/3 of total exports. Yet the minister speaks of transforming the economy and of progress made in diversification, but figures don't lie.
That's right.
Should we as a nation be concerned about this, Mr. Speaker? I say we should. I am no prophet of doom, but the simple truth is that no one can predict the future world market price of gold, and it is unwise to plan an economy on so tenuous a foundation. What is going to happen to the many thousands who now depend on this industry to feed themselves and their families should gold prices head south? Where is the cushion going to come from to save them from possible indignity? Mr. Speaker, it is because a budget is not a bookkeeping exercise, but rather an executive function or responsibility that I am spending time looking at this document, which promises a better Guyana from this perspective, as opposed to focusing on the minutiae or the numbers contained in it. In any event, we will have 7 days to scrutinize each line item. Let me look briefly, therefore, to the sugar industry. The minister informs us that the government has injected $9.7 billion into this industry over the past 2 years. And Budget 2014 seeks the approval of this House to transfer a further $6 billion to Gaisuco. And what is the basis for this request? Let me do not interpret or paraphrase the minister, but rather quote him directly. These are the minister's words accompanying his request for a further $6 billion, and I quote, "With a soon-to-be appointed new board of directors and senior management and the injection of more innovative thinking into both the strategic and operational challenges that continue to beset the industry and a more harmonized industrial climate, the emergence of a revitalized sugar industry is anticipated." End of quote. APNU has previously expressed our concern at the massive transfers to Gaisuco, as well as the GPL, in the absence of a bipartisan agreement on appropriate reform proposals. In the absence of this, we see these transfers as a handout. In the meantime, the industry produces less and less, and last year exported a mere $112 million US. There are actually contradictory figures in the speech because under Appendix 5, the figure of 114 million is given. The minister may wish to correct this and decide which one is correct. Or less than 20% of gold exports, and the projections for this year is for it to earn even less, or US dollars 103.3 million. Mr. Speaker, this cooperation has produced so many so-called turnaround plans in the past decade that one industry expert has opined that it is in danger of getting I-turned. In the meantime, the minister is seeking to transport us to utopia, and himself has donned the cap of Voltaire's character Pangloss. There's rhetoric and there's reality. As for the rice industry, Mr. Speaker, the figures give cause for even more concern. Sales of rice and paddy under the Petrocaribe arrangement for the period July 2011 to January 2014 total $336.5 million US, which represents 77% of total rice exports in 2012 and 2013. Mr. Speaker, given current events and political instability in Venezuela, no one can be certain that these arrangements will remain in place in the long term. In the absence of other available markets, the potential for dislocation and disruption to this industry is real. So while the minister boasts, when we are in the government, we will get more markets.
That's right. That's right. That's
So while the minister boasts of economic growth,
That's right.
macroeconomic stability, and of diversification, the economy has a structural imbalance.
That's right. There you go.
Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention to this ministry, what is now a mega ministry. The first thing we need to establish is what is supposed to be the role of this ministry and to see if its actions are consistent with same.
Right.
Its role is defined or more like circumscribed by the Constitution, and in particular, in three of its articles. These are Article 75, which says that Parliament shall provide that local democratic organs shall be autonomous and take decisions which are binding upon their agencies and institutions and upon the communities and citizens of their areas. Article 77 reads that the development program of each region shall be integrated into the national development plans, and the government shall allocate funds to each region to enable it to implement its development program. And Article 77A, which says that Parliament shall by law provide for the formulation and implementation of objective criteria for the purpose of the allocation of resources to and the garnering of resources by local democratic organs. In conjunction with the foregoing, we have to refer to the Fiscal Transfers Act, which was passed in this House in August of last year and assented to by the President in November of 2013. Mr. Speaker, Clause 6.2 of this Act states, and I quote, that in arriving at the determination of the annual subvention from central government to local authorities, it is acknowledged that central government has a responsibility to provide financial resources to local authorities to supplement their own revenues and in order to assist them to discharge their functions and responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, there are 81 of such local democratic organs. My friend, if you listen, you will learn.
Your voice no one.
10 of these are regional democratic councils. There are 10 regional democratic councils, 6 municipalities, and 65 NDCs. And the Constitution says that they shall be autonomous, which means having the freedom to govern themselves and to act independently. The role of this ministry, therefore, is to provide support to these 81 democratically elected councils, not to seek to suffocate them, and certainly not to undermine or marginalize them as is currently happening. While the Constitution states that these councils shall be autonomous, the central government is using its steel heel via REOs, clerks in the case of our municipalities, and overseers in the case of NDCs to subvert the authority of these organs in a naked display of despotism. The equivalent of this would be a permanent secretary exercising more authority than his or her subject minister, or of all of the permanent secretaries as a collective dictating to the cabinet. This is the absurdity of what prevails with regards to local democracy and the functioning of local democratic organs. It is the government which is refusing to hold local government elections to have the life of these councils renewed. Yet, the minister comes to this House and uses incendiary and unbecoming language, like comatose, to describe these bodies. Mr. Speaker, the minister seeks $1 billion to fund a program he refers to as a cleanup campaign, which in his words will be spearheaded by the government. It is clear from the minister's speech that this allocation will not be given to the various councils as the law requires, but rather the intention is for it to be dispersed directly by the government and its collaborators. This is an invidious initiative and one designed to make the existing councils look bad.
Yes.
Its purpose can be only to score political points.
Yes.
It represents the height of lawlessness.
Yes.
It is not really about a cleanup campaign. It is part of an elections campaign.
Look, that's right.
Instead of being part of the solution, the government chooses to be part of the problem.
Yes, you know.
Mr. Speaker, let us examine the allocations to this mega ministry for 2012 to now. And I'm looking at just current expenditure, which represents employment costs and something which is referred to as other charges. No capital expenses, Mr. Speaker.
You are paying him Freedom House.
In 2012, the allocation was 278 million.
Government money.
In 2013, 325 million. And in 2014, 333 million. Under programs 131, 132, and 133. When we look at the stated objectives for the respective programs, we begin to appreciate how misguided the government is. Program 131, main office. Mr. Speaker, the program objective as described in the budget, this is what it says. To ensure the successful implementation of the ministry's plans, policies, and development programs in accordance with, here, good governance, facilitating infrastructure, and human resource development in the regions. Incidentally, Mr. Speaker, this program has a total staff of 17 persons, and every one of them are contracted employees. But that's a different story.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, local government is about local democracy. It is not about what central government wishes. That was perhaps the old construct prior to the enactment of the 1980 Constitution and of the strengthened provisions relating to local government in the amendments of 2001. I've already related Articles 75 and 77, which provides for local democratic organs to be autonomous and that the government is obligated to allocate funds to each region as well as other local organs to enable them to implement their development program. But the government, you will have your turn, madam.
Yes.
You will be able to answer. But the government comes to this house and says it wants money to implement the ministry's development program. Here we have one unit undermining and subverting the authority of 81 statutory authorities, 81 statutory bodies. The centralist perversity. This degrading of the authority of local democratic organs does not stop there. There's a whole parallel structure that now forms part of this unlawful framework. And here I'm referring to the overwhelming authority of public agencies. Among these being the Sea Defense, NDIA, Lands and Surveys, EPA, in local communities. The experience is that they exercise enormous authority without any duty or obligation to consult with local democratic organs in dispensing national resources or direct local ones to their friends. The government has recently added to this mischief with another body under its control called anti-litter regulations, with litter wardens doing what is a job for local democratic organs. This addiction to control is immoral, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget proposes an allocation of $795 million under line item 1900-400, with the executing agency being the Ministry of Finance. The project description...
Honourable members, it is unfair to Mr. Bulkan for a sub-debate to be going on over his head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, please, Mr. Bulkan.
Mr. Speaker, this budget proposes the allocation of $795 million under line item 1900-400, with the executing agency being the Ministry of Finance. The project description shows that it is for interventions in communities countrywide. There is something called a poverty program with a proposed allocation of $725 million. This program, we are told, is to provide support to vulnerable groups through community development programs and projects. And there's a youth initiative program with a budget of $69 million. Again, we are told for small community-driven infrastructure projects. So right here we have allocations totaling $1,589 million, almost $1.6 billion for community projects to be executed by another central government body. And what is the capital subvention for 71 local government organs? Mr. Speaker, it is $359 million, or less than 1/4 of this single component under the Ministry of Finance.
Oh, wow, so much fun.
Mr. Speaker, in response to parliamentary questions asked by my colleague, Mrs. Lawrence, we learned that for 2013 allocations under this so-called poverty program, $15 million was given as support to the National Director of something called the Community Development Council, CDC. Unless I am mistaken, the National Director of this body is Ms. Philomena Sahoy Shuri, also known as Fireball.
Yeah.
I do not know if this so-called CDC is a statutory body, as it does not exist in any of the local government legislation, namely chapters 2801, 2802, or 2809. But why should we have a CDC when there are already 81 statutory bodies which are being underfunded? What I do know is that the CDC director has been going about the country assisting in dismantling elected bodies, that is NDCs, and replacing them with appointed ones, or IMCs. This is not a fireball, Mr. Speaker. This is more like a wrecking ball. Among the activities funded in 2013 under the poverty program was $71 million through the Public Works Ministry to clean up sections of Georgetown. $16 million for the now infamous San Jose Bridge in Maruca, which I believe my colleague, Mr. Harman, will speak about. And $54 million to host the National Tushaus Council meeting in October of last year. Of course, much of the NTC meeting was devoted to bashing and vilifying the majority of this House. Mr. Speaker, this program is aptly titled, as it is named, Poverty Program and not Anti-Poverty Program. It is being used, however, as a massive slush fund.
That's right. That's the fact, one.
Mr. Speaker, the problem gets worse. In 2001, the Constitution was revised and new provisions were introduced, as I have said earlier, to strengthen local democracy. One of the new constitutional articles is 78A, which requires the establishment of a local government commission. The article reads as follows: Parliament shall establish a local government commission, the composition and rules of which empower the commission to deal with, as it deems fit, all matters related to the regulation and staffing of local government organs, and with dispute resolution within and between local government organs. It took the PPP Civic 12 years for the legislation to be enacted to allow for this entity to come into being. It finally happened in August of last year with passage of the relevant bill, and which received presidential assent in early November 2013. This act, however, is waiting on a commencement order from the subject minister for its operationalization. Even though it is 13 years since the Constitution dictated that we have this body, the minister is unmoved and apparently unconcerned. The budget speech makes no mention of funding for this important constitutional entity designed to professionalize and depoliticize the management of communities. Instead, the budget speaks of bypassing the statutory responsibility of local government bodies and for central government to spearhead the cleaning up of communities. Mr. Speaker, the government is making a mockery of democracy. Mr. Speaker,
Hear the facts.
the phenomenon of which I speak is real,
Hear the facts.
not imaginary. And I can assure you that my surname is Bulkan, not Criote. Mr. Speaker, let us look at how central government actions are leading to underdevelopment in the regions and to hardship for our people. I will use Region 8 as an example, and what happens there applies to all 10 regions, but particularly regions where the PPP does not have a majority on the RDC. Yes. The action that I refer to is that of sidelining the RDC from administering the affairs of the region as prescribed by the Constitution. Yeah. In 2012, $8 million was approved under line item 240-2200. $5 million of which we were told was to purchase a Bedford Model M truck to be used for health services in the region, as well as to take Region 8, as well as to take drugs into the region. 2 years on, there is no evidence of this truck, and the health committee of the RDC has not been given any information as to why this is so. It is suspected that what was bought was another pickup, PRR 3520. I have pictures of them here. For exclusive use of the REO.
All right.
Even though he had a perfectly functioning vehicle, PNN 9505.
That's the pictures there.
Both of the vehicles are here, Mr. Speaker.
Here I tell you.
A truck for the benefit of the region, or a new status symbol for the REO.
There we go.
The question has been asked, who is to benefit from these bigger and bigger budgets? The masses or a privileged few? The philosophy seems to be, to him that hath shall be given. Meanwhile, we are advised that the region's vehicles are being used to do party political work. In last year's budget, money was approved for teachers' quarters at Paramakatoy. I was there last week as part of an APNU team that visited the North Pakaraimas, and residents there complained of this incomplete facility and the effects of students not having trained teachers at the secondary school. This time, both the Works and Education committees are ignored, sidelined. Again in 2013 budget, $12 million was voted for an ambulance for the Madhya Hospital.
It's outside here.
This ambulance is yet to arrive. There is clearly no urgency. A 4x4 double cab cruiser was bought last year, ostensibly for education.
I know you will be there.
This vehicle, PRR 7145, this is another one here, Mr. Speaker, is mainly being used by the engineer, and it is reported that many nights it is parked at the said engineer's home after a night of cavorting.
One second, Mr. Bulkan. Be careful, be careful. You are speaking about an identifiable officer. So be very careful.
I said it is reported.
I would ask that you withdraw that.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I withdraw it.
Thank you.
And what is the transportation provided for the head of this region, the regional chairman? Here it is, Mr. Speaker.
ATV.
A fully air-conditioned motorbike. Central government's message is clear, and it is that they will handicap the statutory body and empower their officers. It is happening all over the country. It is iniquitous.
Answer it.
Mr. Speaker, Honorable Member Mrs. Garida Lowe recently received answers to questions she posed concerning vehicles PKK 2288 and PLL 6278. These questions were repeatedly asked by the regional chairman to the former minister and to the REO, but he was never accorded the respect of a reply. In any event, Mr. Speaker, $2 million was spent on PKK 2288 and approximately $1.4 million on PLL 6278, both in 2012. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, is that PKK 2288 never returned to the region.
What? Gamno, you got a vehicle?
Seems like it was lost like the Malaysian Airlines, Mr. Speaker. Malaysian aircraft. And since its repairs, or its so-called repairs, PLL 6278 never worked properly. There's a picture of PLL 6278. Mr. Speaker, even something as basic as the supply of pure water is not being delivered to residents in many parts of the region, despite what the honorable member said a short while ago, due to insensitivity and incompetence on the part of the government and its appointed officers, while elected officials are shut out from their lawful role of administering the region's affairs. Perhaps the most galling problem, though, concerns electricity supply to Madhya, the administrative center of the region, and where residents presently receive a maximum of 12 hours daily and have to pay $100 per kilowatt hour. In this budget, the sum of $208 million is sought for power supply in Madhya, Matthews Ridge, and Linden. Later, we will learn how much of this is, yeah, it says Linden, the estimates. With the estimates. Later, we will learn how much of this is designated for Madhya. But what is certain is that it will represent a band-aid when a win-win solution, as well as a permanent one, is already there. I refer to the Chumachumari hydroelectric plant, on which a test run in 2012 established it to be functional.
Honourable member, your time is up. You require an extension of 15 minutes. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the honourable member be given 15 minutes to continue his presentation.
While the government has entered into a contract with a private promoter who has the know-how for lease of this facility, as well as a power purchase agreement, the contractor has so far been unable to raise the financing for the full rehabilitation of the power plant and to run the transmission line to Madhya, mainly due to the unavailability of developmental capital locally. I say that given the importance of electricity and the presence of this facility in the region, there can be no valid reason why the government could not have found a way to see the facility become operational by way of a simple equity contribution and to benefit thousands of persons by fostering development as well as job creation. Mr. Speaker, a mere $30 million would have been sufficient, and not by way of a handout, but as I have said, an equity contribution. We recall that massive concessions and incentives were given for Cricket World Cup in 2008, but it appears that the residents of Region 8 are second-class citizens. This is why residents there have told me that they believe they are a part of apartheid. While we await to hear from government spokespersons why they could not have intervened to raise people's living standards, I point them to Article 16 of the Constitution, which says that the state shall foster the development of such relevant forms of cooperation and of business entities as are seen to be supportive of the goals of economic development. Mr. Speaker, we must not cherry-pick those parts of the Constitution that suits our purposes. I can see no impediment to government's intervention in a case such as this. The point, Mr. Speaker, is that were the RDC engaged in the way the Constitution specifies, this would have been a priority project for funding, and long before today, the residents from Mango Landing all the way to Madhya would have had access to continuous and reliable supply of electricity at about half the price they are currently paying. Mr. Speaker, once more I say the problem is worse than what I've outlined so far. When the allocations are approved, the RDC is shut out from the award of contracts. Further parliamentary questions for Mrs. Garida Low finally revealed the contracts awarded in 2012 and 2013. In 2012, 96 were awarded, and in 2013, a total of 102 for all types of works throughout the region. These contracts were awarded by a central government body called the Regional Tender Board, from which elected officials of the RDC were excluded. This is the aberration that the government practices. I say shame on you.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, Guyana is a large country, and it cannot be effectively or efficiently managed from the center in the absence of meaningful engagement with the 10 regional governments. It is dangerous to try and craft a national budget from Main Street, and such an approach will fail. So ingrained is the disrespect for local democracy and local government bodies that these estimates have not been given to the regional chairman that I have spoken with. I suspect that we might be told that they have to wait until after the estimates are approved for they to be given copies. But I maintain that this is the height of disrespect.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, in my 2013 budget rebuttal, I urge that what is needed...
Settle down, please. Honorable members, Mr. Bulkan needs not only to finish, but to be heard. He's making good
I
points.
urge that what is needed is a comprehensive approach to the needs of the region and of hinterland communities, but that this task has to be approached from the bottom up, not from the top down. In other words, the regional governments have to be meaningfully engaged to identify their priorities, not what currently obtains, which is central government unilaterally deciding what hinterland communities will receive, such as inadequate netbook without internet connectivity, when young people cannot even get jobs. We have to find out who are actually benefiting from these interventions, the suppliers of goods or the hinterland residents.
There you go.
Seeking to place hinterland economies on a sustainable path has to be a priority of any government if we are to do justice to the expectations of our people and afford them a good life. I also then called on the government, as I previously did in 2012, to cease the invidious practice of breaching provisions of the Constitution. I do so again, Mr. Speaker. Projects and interventions in the regions must not be the sole responsibility of a handful of unelected officials. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret that the combined opposition was not engaged in the crafting of this budget. Yet the minister bemoans and decries what he refers to as legislative stalemate and of its debilitating consequences. But when required to make good on their own obligation, what is the government's responsibility? What is the government's response? It's here.
Dr. Singh, could you allow the member to speak, please?
What is their response, Mr. Speaker? It's here on the cover of the budget speech. I refer to this cup here on the right.
You see a cup?
What it says is that we will do it our way.
That's right.
Had APNU been consulted, there are many areas of concern that we would have engaged the government on. Some of the priority areas to be addressed includes job creation, training, education, and health access, the high level of taxation, and the inequitable burden being borne by some segments. We would have wanted to see that there are transparent arrangements to ensure that the resources of the state are appropriately and fairly managed and distributed, concerned as we are over the unacceptably low standards to which financial management has deteriorated. Other issues include operation of the consolidated fund, I refer to the withholding of deposits to it, disposal of state assets, granting of fiscal concessions, and the award of contracts. The inadequacy of the regulatory framework, and which led, for example, to the CLICO fiasco with severe consequences for the NIS. The absence of national buy-in of key capital projects and the criteria and rationale for the overall program. Projects, as we've already heard, such as Amaila, CGIA Terminal Building, Marriott Hotel, there's the Hope Canal, 4-lane extension to Diamond and to Better Hope. The need for a social and political audit on NCN by an independent entity, the operation of GGMC as an independent institution, the need for an independent broadcast authority, and that discussion would necessarily involve the scandal of what is known as the spectrum giveaway. The list is long, Mr. Speaker, but my time is up. So finally, Mr. Speaker, if it is that the whole is the sum of its parts, then how can you have a product where main components are missing, which is meaningful engagement with the majority of members in this House, as well as the 10 regional governments? This budget, therefore, cannot fly. It has terminal defects with regards to good governance, accountability, transparency, and respect for the Constitution. There will have to be modifications to it. The minister will have to go again, will have to go and come again. Thank you.
Yes.